Stay with me until the end of this one, because what happened to Harriet Voss on the coldest morning of 1887 is the kind of story that doesn't let you go. She was 26 years old, standing in the mud outside the Caldwell County Land Office, with a notice of foreclosure in one hand and her dead husband's pocket watch in the other. The watch didn't work. Hadn't worked since the day Boyd Voss rode out to check the fence line and didn't come back. That was 14 months ago. 14 months of her trying to hold 40 acres together with nothing but cracked hands and a stubbornness she'd inherited from a mother she barely remembered. The man inside the land office, a lawyer named Sterling Pruitt, had given her until Friday. This was Wednesday. She didn't cry walking back to the wagon. She'd made a rule for herself after Boyd's funeral: cry at night, work during the day. So she climbed up onto the bench, clicked her tongue at the mule, and started the 4-mile ride back to a farm that was no longer going to be hers in 48 hours. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching her from across the street. His name was Cade Harrow, and he hadn't been to town in almost 2 years. He had reasons for that. Good ones, he thought, though most people who knew him before the war would have called them excuses. He ran sheep on a high-grass property 12 miles north of Caldwell, close enough to the Cimarron that you could hear the water when the wind came from the right direction. He had 2 ranch hands who came on Tuesdays and left by Thursday. He had a dog named Print who slept across the doorway every night. He had a rifle that hadn't misfired in 11 years and a coffee pot that had. He'd come to town that Wednesday for coffee and boot tacks, and he'd ended up standing under the awning of the feed store, watching a woman in a gray dress read a piece of paper like it had just told her someone else she loved was dead. He didn't know her, didn't make it his business to know people anymore. He bought his coffee and his tacks, loaded the saddlebags, and started back north. He made it about a mile before he turned around. Harriet had pulled the wagon over at the creek crossing to let the mule drink. She was sitting on a rock, not really looking at anything, when she heard a horse come up slow behind her. She turned fast. You learned to do that, living alone, and had her hand on the rifle before she saw it was just one rider, no gun drawn, both hands visible. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Ma'am," he said, "I don't mean to startle you. I saw you at the land office." "Most people don't follow women they see at the land office," she said. "No," he agreed, "they don't." He had a long face, weathered the way fence posts get weathered, gray at the edges but still solid through the middle. She put him at somewhere between 35 and 50, which was a wide range, but grief aged men strangely, and she'd stopped trusting her estimates. He had the look of someone who'd spent years trying to take up less space than he actually occupied. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want to know if Pruitt is the one threatening your land." She said nothing. "Because Sterling Pruitt has been buying up foreclosed properties for 3 years, Cade said, "and every one of them has had water access. And yours is the last property on Chalk Creek before it joins the Cimarron." Harriet looked at him for a long moment. "How do you know about my property?" "I'm your neighbor," he said, 12 miles north. Cade Harrow. He didn't offer his hand, just waited. Harriet Voss. "I know," he said. "Your husband used to buy hay from a man I know. I heard about what happened. I'm sorry." She stood up. She was tall for a woman, and she let herself be tall right then. "Mr. Harrow, if you've come to offer to buy me out too, you can turn that horse around." "I haven't," he said. "I came because I think I know something about Pruitt that might matter to you, something your husband might have known too." That stopped her. "My husband," she said carefully, "died checking a fence line. I know that's what the report said." The mule had finished drinking. The creek moved around the stones the way it always did, indifferent and steady. Somewhere in the willows a red-winged blackbird called once and went quiet. "You'd better come to the house," she said. She made coffee while he stood her kitchen like a man who'd forgotten how to be inside a building. He didn't sit until she told him to. He looked at the walls instead of at her, which she noticed and filed away. What he told her, laid out plain across her kitchen table, was this. Sterling Pruitt had been working with a surveyor named Alderman, a man Cade had caught trespassing on his own north pasture 18 months ago, to quietly reclassify water access properties as disputed territory under an old territorial act. Once the classification went through, the original owners could be foreclosed for unpaid dispute fees they'd never been notified of. Then Pruitt's land company bought the properties at auction for a fraction of value. 6 properties in 3 years. Always the same pattern. "Why are you telling me this?" Harriet asked. Cade wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Because my property is next," he said. "After yours, and I can't fight it alone. I've tried the county clerk. I've tried the circuit judge. Pruitt has both of them." He looked at her then, directly for the first time. "But there's a federal land commissioner coming through Dodge City in 10 days. If someone could get him documentation, the original survey maps, the fee notices, proof that notices were never delivered, he has the authority to suspend the reclassifications." And you have the survey maps? Half of them.
The original deed survey for my property, but Pruitt's office will have the others, and somebody would have to get inside. Harriet set down her cup. You're asking me to break into a lawyer's office. I'm telling you what I know, he said. I'm not asking you anything.
She looked at him across the table, at his hands, which were scarred in the particular way that meant not ranch work, something older and worse,
At the way he held himself like he was waiting to be told he'd done something wrong.
You came back, she said. You saw me at the land office and you left and then you came back.
He didn't deny it. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because I know what it looks like, he said.
When a person is the last thing standing between their family's land and someone who wants to take it.
And I know what it costs them to stand there alone. She didn't say anything. I stood there alone for a long time, he said. It doesn't go well. They had 8 days.
She didn't tell him yes that night. She told him she'd think on it, and she did, for about 4 hours. Lying awake in the dark, listening to the windwork at the window frames, Boyd had never gotten around to resealing. By 3 in the morning, she'd made up her mind.
By sunrise, she'd packed a bag. He was already at her fence line when she rode out. He didn't look surprised. They rode mostly in silence the first day, which suited them both. She'd learned that silence wasn't always avoidance. Sometimes it was just two people not wasting words on things that didn't need saying.
Boyd had been a talker. She'd loved him for it, and sometimes found herself in a quiet room, missing the sound of his voice more than anything else, more than his face even, which shamed her a little.
Cade Harrow was not a talker, but he wasn't the cold kind of quiet.
He pointed out things as they rode, a hawk circling something in the grass, a section of trail that would be soft from the last rain. He checked twice that her mare was keeping pace all right. Small things. She catalogued them without meaning to. They camped the first night at the edge of a cedar break, a good 15 miles from Caldwell. He built the fire with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times, and cared about 0 of them. She made biscuits in the pan. Neither of them said much through supper.
How long have you had that property? She asked finally. 11 years. You built it yourself? Mostly.
Hired 2 men for the foundation.
He poked at the fire. You? I came with Boyd. He'd had it 4 years before we married. I always thought of it as his until. She stopped. Started again. After, it became mine. Does that make sense?
Yes, he said. And the way he said it told her something had become his in a similar way, though she didn't ask what. She found out the next morning without asking. She woke before dawn to hear him outside and lay still, listening. He wasn't doing anything. Just standing there in the gray pre-light, looking north. She could see him through the tent gap, hands at his sides, perfectly still, in the way of a man looking at something that wasn't there anymore. She didn't call to him. Some mornings were private. They reached Caldwell on the 3rd day, coming in from the south so as not to be seen together. Pruitt had eyes in town, Cade said, and he was right. She checked into the hotel under the name Harriet Burke. He didn't check in at all. He had an old contact, a man named Felder, who ran the livery and owed him a debt he didn't explain, who let him sleep in the back room. The plan was simple in outline and complicated in execution. Pruitt's office was on the 2nd floor of the Caldwell Commerce Building. The survey records, the originals, would be in his filing cabinet, which a woman who cleaned the office on Tuesdays had once described to Felder's wife as that enormous green beast by the window. Tuesday was 4 days away. Harriet spent those 4 days watching. She had a talent for invisibility, which she'd never thought of as a talent before. She'd thought of it as a failure, the way certain women went unnoticed in a room. But she sat in the dress shop across the street for 2 afternoons and watched who came and went from the Commerce Building. She took her supper at the cafe 2 doors down, 3 nights running, and listened to what the men at the counter talked about. She bought thread she didn't need at the Mercantile and chatted with the woman behind the counter until she learned that Sterling Pruitt ate lunch at the hotel dining room every Tuesday from noon to 1:30 and considered himself the kind of man who wasn't to be disturbed during that time. She reported all of this to Cade in the livery after dark. 1:30 to 1:30, she said. That's our window. He looked at her in the way she was starting to recognize, like he was revising some assumption he'd made. You're good at this. I lived alone on 40 acres for 14 months, she said. You learn to pay attention to what's coming. He nodded then. My brother was killed in the war. I came back and the property was mortgaged without my knowledge. A man named Holbrook had worked with my mother. She was ill. She didn't understand what she was signing. By the time I sorted it out legally, it had cost me 3 years and everything I'd saved. That's why I know the pattern. He said it flatly, the way you said things you'd made peace with, even if the peace was uneasy. I don't want that for you. I'm not your responsibility, Mr. Harrow. No, he said. You're not. He looked at his hands. But I'd like, If it's not unwelcome, I'd like to help you anyway. She held that for a moment. The lantern swung slightly in a draft from somewhere, and the shadows moved across his face.
It's not unwelcome, she said.
Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of wind that had teeth in it. Harriet put on her best dress, not her finest, which would have drawn attention, but the blue wool one that made her look like a woman with business to conduct rather than a woman with anything to hide. She carried an empty satchel and a folded letter she'd written herself, addressed to a fictitious lawyer in Kansas City, that she could produce if anyone asked why she was on the second floor of the Commerce Building. Pruitt left for the hotel at noon, exactly as she'd been told he would. She waited 10 minutes. Cade stood at the corner of the feed store below, not looking up at the window, which was how she knew he was watching. She went in. The staircase was narrow and creaked on the third step, which she'd learned by going up and coming back down with a question for the clerk on the ground floor the previous Friday. She stepped over the third step. The hallway was empty. Pruitt's door was locked, but it was a simple lock, the kind Boyd had used on the grain shed, and the small tool Felder had lent her turned it in under a minute. The green cabinet was exactly where the cleaning woman had said it would be. The files were organized the way lawyers organize things, not for the benefit of anyone else. It took her 22 minutes, moving fast and silent, to find the original survey maps for 6 properties including hers and Cade's, along with, more important, more damning, a file of fee notices that had never been sent. The envelopes were still sealed, still addressed, still sitting in Pruitt's cabinet. She photographed nothing, because there was no way to photograph anything in 1887. She took the documents themselves, folded them flat, and put them in her satchel under the fictitious letter. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs. She moved to the window. Cade was no longer at the corner of the feed store. The footsteps were unhurried, not Pruitt, who walked like a man who'd never questioned his right to be anywhere. These footsteps were careful. They stopped outside the door. She pressed herself flat against the wall beside the cabinet. The door opened. It was the cleaning woman, bucket in hand, 2 days early. She took one look at Harriet. Harriet looked back at her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment.
Those papers he won't let anybody touch,
the cleaning woman said finally, nodding at the satchel. She was 50 or so, with the face of a person who'd seen many things and had opinions on most of them.
Yes, Harriet said. People have lost their land over those papers.
Yes, the cleaning woman nodded once, set down her bucket, picked up a cloth, and started on the windowsill with her back to the door.
I'd be quick if I were you, she said. He comes back early sometimes. Harriet was gone in 30 seconds.
Cade was waiting at the alley behind the building. He saw her face and started moving before she reached him. They were 2 streets over before either of them slowed down, and when she pulled the documents from the satchel and held them up, he went very still in the way of a man who had spent a long time not letting himself believe something was going to work.
All 6 properties, she said.
And the undelivered notices.
Pruitt never sent them. He has the evidence of his own fraud sitting in his cabinet.
He took the documents from her hands, looked through them slowly. When he looked up, his face was different, not younger exactly, but lighter somehow, like something that had been pressing on him had shifted.
Harriet, he said.
Just her name, but the way he said it, she felt it. She didn't say anything about feeling it. They had 4 days of hard riding to reach Dodge City in time for the land commissioner, and this wasn't the moment. But she filed it away, the way she'd been filing things away since that first conversation across a kitchen table, building a case she hadn't meant to build. They reached Dodge City on a Sunday evening with a day to spare. The federal land commissioner was a meticulous man named Everhart who wore spectacles and asked questions in the manner of someone who had seen every variety of frontier fraud and was no longer surprised by any of it. He took the documents. He read them. He asked Harriet and Cade separately to account for how the documents had come into their possession, and they both told him the truth, which was that they'd entered Pruitt's office without permission and taken what Pruitt had stolen first. Everhart looked at them over his spectacles. You understand, he said, that what you did was illegal. Yes, sir, Harriet said, and you did it anyway. Yes, sir. He looked back at the documents, at the sealed, undelivered envelopes, at the survey maps altered in Alderman's hand. Give me 24 hours, he said. He needed 18. Sterling Pruitt was arrested on a Tuesday. The same day of the week, Harriet noted that she'd been in his office. The surveyor Alderman disappeared before the warrant reached him and was never found, which was its own kind of verdict. The reclassifications were suspended. All 6 properties were cleared. Harriet got the news in a letter that arrived at her farm 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon when she was mending the fence along the south pasture, the same fence Boyd had been checking when he died. She read it standing up, in the wind, and then she sat down in the grass and let herself cry in the middle of the day. which she hadn't done since the funeral. She let herself feel all of it. The relief and the grief and the particular exhaustion of having fought for something that should never have been at risk. She sat there until the feeling passed through her the way weather passes, and then she got up and finished the fence. Cade Harrow rode down from his property the following Saturday. He didn't send word ahead. She saw him coming from the window and went to the porch to wait, which was a choice she made consciously and without pretending otherwise to herself. He had a young dog with him, not Print, a new one, maybe a year old, who bounded ahead of him down the track and then got shy at the porch steps and sat down. "She yours?" Harriet asked. "Just found her," he said. He pulled up and stayed on his horse for a moment, looking at the farm the way he'd been looking north from their camp that first morning, at something real rather than something lost. "Your fence looks good. I fixed it last week." He nodded. Then, "I didn't come about the fence." "I know," she said. He got down from his horse. He was not a man who made speeches. He stood at the bottom of her porch steps with his hat in his hands. She'd never seen him without his hat before, she realized, and he said, "I'd like to court you, Mrs. Voss. If that's something you'd consider." She looked at him, at the hat, at the dog who was still sitting at the bottom of the steps, watching her too, as if the dog had also come with a stake in the matter. "You were alone a long time before this," she said. "Yes, so was I. Yes," he said. "I know that." He held her gaze, steady. "I'm not asking because I need someone. I'm asking because it's you." The afternoon light was coming in long and gold across the pasture, the way it did in November when the grass had gone amber. The dog gave up on formality and thumped her tail once against the ground. "Come up on the porch, Mr. Harrow," Harriet said. "I'll make coffee." They married the following April on a Thursday at the county courthouse, with Felder from the livery and the cleaning woman, whose name turned out to be Mrs. Aldred, as their witnesses. It was not a large wedding. It was not the kind either of them had expected to have, but the judge who performed the ceremony said afterward that in 30 years of doing this work, he didn't think he'd ever seen two people pay closer attention to the words. They built on Cade's property first, then on hers, then decided the sensible thing was to work both and let the land define itself over time. They had a daughter they named Pearl and a son 3 years later who they named for Cade's brother. They had 23 years together on that land, long enough to see Pearl married to a quiet man who reminded Harriet a little of Cade in his younger years, long enough to teach their son the particular discipline of caring for something that needed you to be paying attention. Cade died in the winter of 1910, peacefully, which was more than most men of his generation were given. He died in his own bed on his own land, with the window cracked the way he liked it, and with Harriet's hand in his, which was where it had been most mornings for 23 years. She lived 12 years after him. She fixed fences when they needed fixing. She taught Pearl's daughters how to read a land map and a legal notice, and how to tell the difference between a man who was tired and a man who had given up. She told them about the Tuesday in Caldwell and the Green Cabinet and Mrs. Aldred and the spectacled commissioner in Dodge City. She told them what it felt like to sit in the grass by the south pasture fence and cry in the middle of the day. She told them, hold your land, know your rights, pay attention to what's coming, and when someone rides back after turning around, pay attention to that too. That's the one who means it.